Welcome to episode 6 of Feeling Through Live. Really excited for this episode. We're joined by Bapin and of the Helen Keller National Center. And Bapin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Well, my full name is Aninja Bhattacharya, but it's a little bit different. Everybody does call me Bapin. So I'm so excited to join this Feeling Through Live with Doug. Currently, I am the coordinator of the National Outreach Technology and Development Training Program. I do coordinate 2 states. I run Florida and Iowa. And with those states, I run the I Can Connect program, which means I provide telecommunication equipment to deaf-blind individuals. So that way they have accessible telecommunication. So really that's my job in a big summary.
Great. Well, thanks for keying us into that. So there's so much to talk about today, and I want to jump right into it. But I think we really need to start with your personal life journey. It's such an amazing journey that's taken you from a rural village in India to being this tech guru here in the United States. And I'd love to start at the beginning. If you could just paint the picture for us.
Okay, sure. Yeah, well, thank you, Doug. So right now I'm fully deaf-blind, but I wasn't born deaf-blind. I was just born deaf. I was born deaf for reasons unknown. At the age of 1, my parents started to realize and notice that I wasn't responsive to sound. If they would call my name, loud noises, I wasn't responding at all. So that's when they realized that I was deaf. At that time, my parents brought me to the hospital to diagnose me. And the doctors were not able to find a cause of my deafness. But at that time, I didn't have a traditional hearing aid like you see today, the one that goes over the ear. I had a processor that I wore around my neck. It was really hard at that time to learn language and to lip read. So my mom was really creative in trying to teach me how to actually speak. She had me hold on to her neck to feel the vibrations, to understand the different types of sounds of vowels and consonants. I actually grew up speaking and learning Bengali. However, my pronunciation, my parents were able to understand my speech. However, other individuals didn't fully understand me. But that's mostly because my family and my close friends knew me. They had that relationship with me, so they understood my speech. My parents looked for different schools that I can attend. But in my home country, there's no resources or any schools that provided services to meet my needs. So my parents were really creative. Well, first, I was born in India, and they were behind in the times. They were very different than America. They were behind in everything. I lived in Talari, which is a village that is south of Calcutta on the eastern side of India. But you have to understand that the village that I lived in, about 80% of that population lived in a very impoverished state. My parents were middle class and well educated. But because I didn't have resources, I was really isolated. My parents were proactive and really worked for me to try to help me get the education that I needed. So my parents did send me to a school, a mainstream school, and the accommodations that they made for me was for me to sit in the front row. So that way I had the ability to actually see my teacher's lips, to try to lip read. But I was still missing a lot of the information from that instruction. And I had a really hard time lip reading and having access to the lessons because, as you know, teachers turn around, they turn their back to you, or they move around in the classroom. So oftentimes, so my mom actually came to elementary school and my schools to be able to help clarify the lesson and help fill in those gaps because I was missing what the teacher was actually saying and teaching. Sometimes I wouldn't understand the homework. So my mom actually would always go and get the lesson and the lesson plans to be able to support that missed learning and those gaps. But at that time in that village, there was no electricity, no running water. There were also no paved roads in my village. So it was a very primitive world. And at that time, I didn't even know the word technology or what that meant. I was in the village until about 9. And how I lost my sight was I was actually playing soccer. And all the boys on my team were hearing and sighted. I was the only deaf boy. So I was really dependent on my vision when playing soccer. And I remember the coach, he actually picked me to become the team manager. And one of the other boys was really upset over that fact because he really wanted to be the team manager. But the coach knew my skills and felt that I was a better match. So we got in a big fight, and the boy actually picked up dirt and actually threw it in my face. And I actually, when he threw it in my face, I couldn't see anything. It got in my eyes. It was really blurry. And so the next day, I got some of my vision back, but it was more like double vision. I couldn't see print. My parents were so worried and shocked. They didn't know what to do, so they rushed me to the hospital. The doctors actually found after evaluation that I actually had a retinal detachment. And over a course of a 3-month period, that's when I lost the rest of the vision in that eye. But without my vision at that time, I was so dependent on lip reading, I had no way to access that communication. There was no interpreters in my village. So I had to use print on palm to be able to access information. Or I was dependent on my parents to then tactily sign to me. I was able to voice and respond myself, but for many years, I just stayed at home isolated with nothing to do. I wasn't going to school at this time, and I was trying to figure out how to keep myself busy. So that's when I got into the hobby of ceramics and sculpting, because it was more tactile for me. My parents wanted me to go to school, and they searched everywhere for schools that would be able to accept me and support my needs. They had deaf schools and they had blind schools, but nobody knew how to deal with a combined hearing and vision loss. So my father actually, in searching for a school for me, met one of the principals of our school for the blind in Calcutta. And that's when they recommended to my parents that I go to Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, Massachusetts. My dad also thought that was a great idea. However, the issue was finances. The cost of a plane ticket was so expensive in comparison to what we earned. My parents didn't have enough money to be able to purchase tickets, flights for us to be able to go to America. So for the School for the Blind, that principal had informed my dad that she had some contacts that may be able to help us purchase those flights. So my dad wrote letters to Perkins School and they awarded me a scholarship. So my dad quickly reacted, filled out all the forms and applications that we needed, and reached out to Perkins, as well as other sponsors, to be able to purchase my flights to be able to get to America. With my dad's writing letters to Perkins and advocating for me, they did respond back that they agreed that I was a good fit for their school and I was awarded a scholarship. However, I didn't know English. I only spoke Bengali. So my dad decided to accompany me and go to America and go to Massachusetts.
Bapin, I'm going to just interject for one moment. Thank you for that. That's a great initial introduction. And if you're just joining us, We're speaking with Bapin Bhattacharya of HKNC, and he's walking us through his life journey. So far, he's described growing up in a rural village in India without any technology, born deaf, and was through an incident with another boy on a soccer field, was actually blinded by that other boy in a little bit of a disagreement. And at this point in his life, he's a small boy in India who's deaf and blind. And he's now walking us through a little bit later on how his parents helped him find out about Perkins, a school that was a good fit for his situation at that moment. And if you're joining us, remember that you can always write any questions in the comments. If you have any questions for Bapin throughout this, we'll certainly try to get to those. And also, if you can click the share button on this stream if you're enjoying it, and share it with other people so that they can join in as well, that would be tremendous. So without further ado, Bapin, please pick up where you left off.
Okay, thank you, Doug. So once I arrived to Perkins, it was a culture shock. It was a completely different world from being in a small village in India to coming to America. And there was a language barrier. I didn't know English at all. I only spoke Bengali. So my dad actually accompanied me for the first week that I was there and interpreted everything for me. He interpreted everything from English into Bengali Sign Language for me. It was just such a different life. But I was ready. I was motivated. I couldn't wait to get into school. To start learning Braille and English. So I started with just the alphabet. And I only knew a few phrases in English, like I love you, or can I go to the bathroom, or can I go to sleep? I'm tired. That's it. So I was so motivated to learn. So at home, every day I studied English and tried to learn the language. And then I picked it up from there. But I remember the one thing that really inspired me was all of the electronics, vacuums, wash machines, all the different appliances that they had in America. I had never seen it before. We didn't have that in my village. We had a wood-burning stove in my village to cook on, and we just had a very different way of doing things. And when I came to America, I remember seeing all these new things, and I had so many questions of how did it work? What does it do? And I remember when I first touched a computer, and a Braille display. At that time, some of the older models of Braille displays were heavy. They're about 10 pounds in these big, almost like bricks. And at that time, I'd known Braille, so I was able to read that. So I started with playing some games. I loved trivia. And I just really started learning more and more about the computer. And that was a special passion that I had of my own that was inspired once I came to America. About a year of being in America, I really learned and mastered the language. I had the help of my interpreters. My father had returned home to India. And I stayed in Massachusetts. I stayed in Perkins. All of my teachers, my parents, everybody agreed that if I returned home to India and then came back, I would regress. I would lose all the skills that I had gained. And not only did I have a love for learning about technology, I wanted to learn how to build computers. So through the use of some volunteers of SSPs, I was able to go to different technology shows. Every weekend I was going and traveling around to different computer shows that were hosted in Massachusetts. And I remember you used to have to use floppy disks and those hard disks to run the computer. And so I slowly started buying all the different components and parts that you needed, like the motherboard. And I brought it back to school in Perkins, and with the help of some teachers, we were able to build it and build this computer that I wanted to build. So I had my SSPs, I had a couple of friends that were really tech savvy. And through the use of my SSPs and other people, they were able to actually give me the visual information. They were telling me the different colors of the wires, what the motherboard looked like, where did it go, where the jumper settings were on the motherboard. And I got that up and running. I was able to build that computer. I was able to install DOS and the disk operating system. That was before Microsoft really was a thing, or Windows. That was the time of DOS. And I learned how to actually do some basic computer programming and write some programs. I remember I would stay up all night till 2 and 3 in the morning just creating my own programs. I remember my parents being shocked that I would just be up all night just busy working away, but they didn't care. They let me do my thing. Then my dad let me set up a BBS, which is the bulletin board system. And that system is a system where people can actually call through a modem. You can have 2 lines in, so people can call in and you can essentially play a game. Similar to modern times of Facebook. So I had 3 bulletin people, where 2 people would actually call my BBS. And I had that up and running for about 2 years. And that's really where I learned a lot of my computer skills and a lot about adaptive technology. I volunteered to help a lot of my deafblind friends with their technology, their computers. And I would actually tell my friends, like, don't get a computer, I'll build it for you. And then I would actually teach them how to use the computer. again, using DOS, and how they can call into their own BBS systems. And I would teach them how to be able to communicate through that. So it was real hands-on learning for the deafblind back then. And I would say I was around 16 or 17 years old. Then I graduated from high school in 1992. I went to college. I went to the University of Arkansas in Little Rock. That was, at that time, the president was Bill Clinton. And that was his home state at the time, Arkansas. So people used to tease me about that. And I remember my best friend and I, we actually went to graduate school together. And he was a big supporter of mine as well as I supported him. However, I did not major in computers or technology or computer science. I actually majored in political science. My dream was to become a lawyer. And the reason why I wanted to become a lawyer was there were so many challenges or issues for anybody who was deafblind. So I wanted to be able to break down those barriers. So I received my degree in political science. Once I graduated, I started looking for a job.
So I'm going to stop you right there, Bapin. Actually, we're going to hold for a moment, and we're gonna do an interpreter switch. So let me know, Bapin, when you are set on your end. We all set? Great. So
all good.
As we continue here, Bapin, I'd love to just take a step back for a moment and have a little bit of back and forth conversation about some of the topics that you've just gone through, because there's so much interesting stuff there, and I want to make sure we have an opportunity to dialogue a little bit about it. But let's go back to what age were you when you first came over to the United States?
I was 13, and that was in 1983.
Had you ever traveled anywhere prior to coming over to the United States?
That was the first time I'd ever flown was to America from India.
So what was that like getting on a plane for the first time and knowing that you were going to a completely different country that was completely different from what you knew?
That's a great question. Like I said, before I became blind, my parents really tried to expose me to as much as possible. So I had seen what a plane looked like, and we were near an airport, so I was able to stand on the roof and see some planes go by, but I never got the opportunity to fly as a sighted person. So the first time getting on an airplane was a really unique experience. it almost looked like, I remember it looking like a bird in the sky, and you saw, the engine spinning, and it was really loud, and I was scared because I had never been away from home. And the flight was about 9 hours that I had to fly from India to Europe, and then had to fly from Europe to America. So I was definitely nervous when turbulence would hit in the airplane. I would get scared. But my dad had a lot of experience flying, so he knew that it was nothing to worry about. But I thought maybe there was a problem with the airplane or something because it was bouncing up and down, and it shouldn't have been.
So I believe between having to stop your schooling in India because there was no school that could accommodate you properly to heading over to the United States, I believe I remember you saying that I think there was a 4-year gap in which you weren't in school. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I was home for 4 years. And what I did really with that time was make a lot of ceramics. And would get in some trouble at home, like any kid would.
So I want to now flash forward again to you as a teenager learning how to build computers. You were at Perkins at this time, is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm wondering, this is obviously pretty early on in computing. Did you know of anyone else in the deafblind community who, I know you said you were teaching other people, but did you know of anyone else before you that was in the deafblind community and learning to build computers?
Not that I knew of, no. It was just me. Later, once I got a job at Helen Keller National Center, there are some deafblind students there that are very, very motivated to learn how to use computers, but that wasn't until much later. But in my early school days, no, there was nobody else that I knew.
So your father traveled with you to America, and he was, in a sense, was he initially acting as an SSP for you, or can you describe a little bit more your relationship?
So my dad is a very dignified individual. He's formally educated, he's a professional, and he was always my biggest advocate, my biggest supporter. He was strict in what he expected. He had a lot of rules that we had to follow. You weren't really supposed to stray too far from the path or get in any kind of trouble. And he was a teacher by trade, so he expected us to follow the rules, and that was my upbringing. Growing up, I was a little bit scared of my father, but now I realize that he was actually an excellent, excellent father. He's 81 now. He's still very healthy and going strong. My dad was very encouraging with my love of computers. To this day, he loves computers, especially now with COVID-19 going on. He gets to be on the computer a lot, which is very helpful. So he's come to appreciate computers just like I have.
And did your mother stay back in India while you and your father traveled to the United States?
Yes. My brother was born, I think he was 4 at the time. So my mom stayed back with my brother, and my dad traveled with me.
Were you and your father able to see your mother and your brother at any point?
No, not for a whole year. We would write letters but it would take about 2 weeks for the letter to be sent and then for us to get a response. So it was very slow communication, but we were able to write letters for that year. After a year in America, my dad went back to Massachusetts went back to India when it was summer vacation, and I stayed behind in Massachusetts. I think my mom came to visit one time and stayed for about 2 months and then went back to India. But that was the only time that I got to see my mom.
So when your father goes back to India, at that point, was that the first time that you'd ever been completely away from your whole family?
Yeah. So I've been by myself since the age of 14, pretty much. I did go back to India fairly often to visit my family, or as often as I could, I should say. Every year or so, I would go back to visit. But yep, that was when I was by myself at school.
So I now know you to be a very independent person. We're talking about this time when you're still a teenager, where it feels like you're really first learning how to be independent. Can you tell me about going back to that part of your story, what it was like to start to be on your own, and how you were able to manage that in the early stages of being alone for the first time or away from your family for the first time?
Yeah, good question. Being by myself in some ways was good. In India, I always had my parents to protect me. So I wasn't a very assertive person, and being by myself kind of forced me to learn on my own, take responsibility for myself, um, advocate for myself to get out into the community, even if I needed an SSP. Perkins, luckily, was very, very flexible with me. They knew that I was pretty mature and responsible, so they let me take advantage of a lot of opportunities. They let me get out and explore almost pretty much as I wanted to. When I went back to India for vacation, I was 16. I asked my dad if I could fly back to America by myself, and he was comfortable with that. But we had a lot of preparation to do, before I could fly independently, because I obviously couldn't see and couldn't hear. But it was something that I wanted to do, and I showed my dad that I had communication cards that I could use with the flight attendants to ask for help. I was able to explain to my dad how I would handle certain things. If I needed someone to communicate with me, they could print on my hand, and I could understand them that way. Then I could ask for somebody to guide me to the gate. And I know that my dad wanted me to learn how to live independently. But at the same time, he was concerned. He was my dad. He wanted to take care of me, but he was also a huge supporter, and he knew he wasn't going to be able to take care of me and be there for me forever. So it was important to foster that independence. So once I was able to show my dad that I was able to communicate on my own and travel safely, he was very please let me do that. And it also helped him understand better that, deafblind people are able to communicate independently. I had my passport ready, I had all my documentation there. It was a little bit nerve-wracking, of course, to fly by myself, but it's also a nice experience because I get to meet a lot of people, I get to talk to people. Everybody I encountered was very nice. I didn't have a negative experience at all, so that was great.
So it sounds like you were pretty comfortable traveling and being in the world independently relatively quickly. Is that fair to say? And if so, how when did you start to feel like really comfortable navigating the world on your own?
Traveling independently was something that I really wanted to do, especially after I came to America. Before I became blind, I was always a wanderer. I love to go out exploring in my village. My parents would tell me it's dangerous, don't go too far away. They didn't really want the kids going out alone or after hours, but I was stubborn and I did it anyway. I just wanted to see everything that was around me. After I became blind, I learned how to use a cane. I had a mobility teacher who always had to tell me to slow down and be patient. I would always try to jump ahead into the lessons and probably do things that weren't the safest. But once I had that cane, I just wanted to go. And they would try to tell me, you can't do that, you're not ready, you don't have the skills. But my stubbornness and my eagerness for exploration kind of took over. But I always had that motivation to be independent. So I was going to do it regardless. I got really comfortable with the Perkins campus at first, and then I started to go out more. I had SSPs and some friends who would help. But once you do it a few times, you get a lot more comfortable. I take cabs by myself. I take the bus by myself. It didn't start out that way, but now, buses, cabs, subways, I'm comfortable navigating alone. It all stems back to the really great training that I got. Having really good orientation and mobility skills allow you the freedom to be able to navigate independently.
So you had really great training at Perkins, which laid the groundwork for you navigating all aspects of your life. But that was quite some time ago. And now in 2020, there's a lot of technology that's available to you that you didn't have then that really serves you in a lot of ways. So can you walk through what your life is like now and the technologies today that serve each part of your life?
Yeah. Back in 2003, I was using a Braille note, which is a really, really old way to communicate. It was like a very, very old GPS that I would put in my pocket, and it had a satellite signal that then would connect to this Braille note. And it would allow me to explore places like New York City and other metropolitan areas. I did live in New York for a while. And I also had a guide dog, my first guide dog, that would help me get around as well. We would go to Central Park, and I would use the GPS around Central Park. I would do that by myself. just to try to figure out where I was, get my bearings in a big place like that. And having that GPS really helped. That was back in the day before GPSs were commonplace. People were just lost all the time, and that device was able to help me find my bearings, and I kind of found my way by getting lost. I would go in one direction and check the device and go, oh wait, nope, that was wrong, turn back, and then go a different direction, and again be like, oh no, that was wrong. And eventually I would find my way. And then in 2008, the devices became a lot more complicated. There were ones you could put in your car, but I was traveling a lot for work. I was going to different hotels, taking cabs, planes, things like that. And we were encouraged to use those GPS devices, and the skills associated with that improved a lot. So there was no more keeping a GPS in your pocket or anything like that. It just became a lot more mainstream to have different devices to help navigate. Now there's things like Lyft and Uber and cab services and apps that you can use to take trains and apps you can use to navigate the airport. When you go on an airplane, I know pilots make announcements all the time. Now, there's the television screen that you see on airplanes, that you can see, where the flight is, how high up in the sky you are, how long until your destination. So it just seems like technology has really exploded as the years have gone on. I routinely travel between home and different work sites. I use the app to look at the timetable for the train on my phone. I can check to see all the different stops. I can check flight times and announcements. I can see what gate my flight is leaving from, or if there was a gate change on my app. I have the app tells you that the flight is boarding. I know to go up to the desk and get on the airplane. I can check things like flight delays or cancellations. I used to have to go and sit by the gate for as long as possible, because I didn't want to wander away, but in the off chance I'd missed my flight. And now I could navigate the terminal a little bit, and I know that I have the app to tell me if the gate has changed or if the flight has been delayed or it's time to board. So I'm not so worried about missing a flight anymore thanks to technology. Sometimes flights do get canceled and I need to rebook. The app will tell me that too. And I can use the app to then rebook the flight. So technology has been a huge benefit.
I think I know from me hearing your story and how you talk about your persistence and perseverance and curiosity in technology. I think that it's easy for someone on the outside to wonder how you've kept such a encouraged and what seems like positive attitude throughout your life. What would you say to someone who's sitting here wondering how you've been able to be so curious and engaged in your life despite some really significant challenges? What would you say to that?
One thing that my dad always said was that I needed to learn how to take care of me. And that was really important. And that's kind of what kept me motivated, was knowing that I could always be there for myself. So I had to learn everything that it took in order to take care of myself. I didn't ever want to be in a position where I couldn't move forward because I was reliant on somebody else who wasn't there. And at times it would get frustrating, but I can't dwell on my hearing, or I can't dwell on my vision loss. There's plenty of other people in the world who have similar experiences, similar backgrounds to me. And it's important that everybody feels positive about who they are. You need to feel good about yourself, whether you have your hearing and your sight or you don't. Keeping a positive attitude and keeping motivated is really important. And I also think it's important to explore different opportunities that come your way, and that's something that I've always done. And you don't want to let anything stop you. I try not to use the word can't. Instead I try to change it, and anytime somebody says can't, I try to prove that I can. One thing that I've thought about a lot has been something like driving a car. And we always said, oh, if you're blind, you're never going to be able to drive a car. Well, technology's at the point now where they're actually developing cars that drive themselves. So who's to say that a blind person will never be able to drive a car? With COVID going around, there's been a lot of emphasis on not touching people and touching things. And as a deaf-blind person, we do rely a lot on touch. My partner has been my communication facilitator this whole time. They're talking a lot about social distancing and having everything done remotely, which has been difficult, but imagine if we didn't have the technology. We have all of these things now to make communication easier. Even, they don't have a robot or anything that could do tactile sign language via Zoom, which would be awesome if there was something like that eventually. But, we're doing the best we can, and considering what we have, we have a lot at our disposal.
So we have about 5 minutes left here. So kind of in the closing time that we have, I have a couple questions that kind of speak to the totality of your journey, but this is kind of related to the last question, but I'm wondering, now being someone who, has this amazing position at Helen Keller National Center and travels the world educating other people about technology, has your own company, what would you say to that 9-year-old boy who's just lost his sight, who has not found the education yet that would serve as the foundation for where you're at now, and is probably a little bit lost and scared? What words would you have to the 9-year-old version of yourself?
If I could go back, I wish I would have seen more services available for people like me, more technology available. I think deaf-blind people are always the last ones to get access. Even we come after even deaf-sighted people or hearing-blind people. We're always at the end. even in getting access to information in the news, it seems like deafblind people are always a little bit behind. So something I've been thinking about a lot is how to change that, how to get access to information, and also how to reduce the stress that comes along with that. And keeping work-life balance is something else that I think I would say. It's really important. Family is really important. It's important to keep those great people in your life. Helen Keller National Center is a really fantastic workplace, especially for someone who is deafblind. But gaining the training and the experience that you want in order to live a life that you're going to be proud of and that's going to benefit you, I think, is the best motivator. And you have to decide what that life is going to look like for yourself. So setting your own goals, working towards them, staying motivated. And something I would like to say is, as someone who's employed by an agency that is very welcoming of deafblind people, I wish more employers were willing and familiar with working with deafblind employees. I think it's really important because America is such a welcoming place, and it's really empowering to be able to be employed and have a useful skill that you can take to work with you. So, we still have a long way to go in a lot of regards. But yeah, that's something that I would say.
So with our last couple minutes here, for those who are watching now or might come to this a little bit later, who are in need of more of the technologies that you teach about, who are in need to have it serve different aspects of their life, what would you say to those people, and where can they go to get more information about various technologies, or what advice would you have for them?
Sure. There's a lot of technology out there. And there's a lot of resources, and it really depends on what your needs are and what your communication is like. Are you somebody who likes to use captions? Are you somebody who prefers to use an interpreter? Do you use hearing aids that help you hear speech, or do you have enough sight to be able to see an interpreter? It's really important to develop the partnerships with the people that you think will help you the most. And I think Helen Keller National Center is a really great place if you can get in touch with them. They have partners around the country that can help get the equipment that's best matched to you, but there are professionals who can do that. If you can get in touch with somebody who can assess what your needs are and match you with the best technology possible. It's really important that whatever system you use is kind of custom designed to you.
Great. So with our very last question here, because we need to wrap up in a moment, but Keith asks, how did you meet your wife?
Okay, I'll tell you very briefly. I was on the board for the American Association for the Deafblind. We had a meeting in Atlanta, and I met her there. She was an SSP for another deafblind board member, and just over the course of the conference, the two of us got to talking. We were friends for a while, just kept in touch. We exchanged contact information at that conference. We were long distance. She's living in California. I was living in New York. But we were friends for a long time, and we would bump into each other at these conferences. And eventually I had asked her to come SSP for me at a conference in Washington, D.C. We had known each other because we'd been friends for a while, and I was comfortable having her SSP for me. And we found out we both really loved to travel. We had gone to India for my brother's wedding in 2006, and that's kind of when we started to fall in love. And then we got married a short time later.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a lovely note to end this episode on. For those of you who tuned in or finding this later, I encourage you to go to Bapin's website, bapin.info, BAPIN.info. He writes in great detail about his personal biography. There's some other videos there of him speaking about his life and his experiences. And, you know, we obviously got through a lot of it today, but there's so much more that's really interesting if you want to know more about him. And there's also a link to his company, Bapin Group, that you can find out more information there as well. Thank you so much, Bapin, for joining us today. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you and to hear firsthand about your really amazing journey. You know, from being a small boy in a rural town in India to being someone who is a real tech expert here in the United States and went on to build your own computers and teach about technology all around the world. So it's really been interesting to hear that firsthand from you. Thank you as always to our interpreters, Aaron and Jamie, to our captioner, Laura, and for those of you who use YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can just type in the Feeling Through Experience in YouTube, hit subscribe. In future weeks, we're going to start live streaming to both. We're going to continue to live stream here on Facebook, but we're also going to live stream to YouTube as well. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please do share them with your friends and your family, anyone that you feel like would be interested in this. We really love when our close-knit community shares the Feeling Through Live with others so that we can grow this community and have a bigger voice and a bigger platform for everyone that we speak with on it. So thank you, everyone who tuned in. Thank you so much, Bapin, and we'll see you next week, same time on Friday. Bye.